Welcome back to #Fish, the channel where we learn all about fish and shrimp farming. I am José Domingos and I am an associate professor in aquaculture at James Cook University in Singapore. Before we begin, I would like to state that these videos are separate from my teaching and research roles at JCU, but are part of my mission to share how aquaculture helps our planet and people by producing high-quality protein for us. Join me as we discover cool and smart ways to farm fish and shrimp that help to keep our oceans healthy. Don't forget to subscribe and watch our talks, and let's dive right in and make a splash together.
Welcome, everyone, to our deep dive into the world of fisheries and aquaculture. We're tackling the FAO's, the State of World Fisheries and Aquaculture 2024 report. And let me tell you, it's pretty eye-opening stuff.
Oh, it is. And you know what's really exciting about this report? It's that it doesn't just throw a bunch of data at you. It's all about what they're calling blue transformation in action. We're talking practical strategies, real-world stuff for a more sustainable future.
So right away, this report hits us with some pretty impressive numbers. Global fisheries and aquaculture production, it reached a record high in 2022, totaling, get this, 223.2 million tons.
Whoa, that is a staggering amount. And to kind of give you a breakdown of that, think of it this way. That includes 185.4 million tons of aquatic animals, plus another 37.8 million tons of algae. Aquaculture is definitely, well, it's making a big splash.
Yeah, it really is. And here's a fact that I gotta admit surprised me. For the first time ever, get this, aquaculture production of animal species actually overtook capture production in 2022.
A real turning point, huh? I mean, think about it. 94.4 million tons of farmed aquatic animals. That's more than any wild catch since 1950, except for a little bump in 2018. It really shows how, I guess, how we're adapting and how we're trying to meet the world's growing demand for seafood.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how our food systems are evolving, right?
Yeah.
But all this production, all this growth, it makes me wonder about, like, the impact. What's the impact on the health of our oceans? I mean, does the report even address that?
Oh, it does. It definitely does. And it really dives deep into the state of fish stocks worldwide.
Right.
And sadly, you know, the percentage of fish stocks fished within biologically sustainable levels, and that basically means they're being fished at a rate that allows them to replenish themselves, right? It's been declining.
Right.
And it actually dipped down to 62.3% in 2021, which, you know, that's pretty concerning.
Yeah, that is worrying, especially because, I mean, overfishing, it's not just bad for the fish themselves, right? It impacts whole ecosystems.
Yeah.
And it can really hurt the communities, the people who rely on those fish.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head there. Overfishing, you know, it can lead to biodiversity loss. It reduces the overall fish production. And it can really, really have a negative impact on the economies of coastal communities. You know, that's why the report really emphasizes this need for balance. We need a balance between, you know, the economic needs, what people need, and the environmental protection. Sustainable fishing practices, those are really, really key.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of sustainable practices, the report actually paints a pretty optimistic picture when it comes to rebuilding overfished stocks, right?
It does. It does. I mean, imagine this. Rebuilding those stocks. It could boost fisheries production by a whopping 16.5 million tons. And get this, that translates to an extra 32 billion US dollars annually.
Wow, those are some serious numbers.
Yeah.
It just shows how sustainable fishing is not just good for the environment, it's good business, you know. It makes economic sense too. But how do we know? How do we ensure that the seafood that we're buying, that it's actually sustainable? Does the report, I mean, does it even touch on that at all?
Boost your shrimp farming success with our step-by-step 120-day protocol for intensive shrimp farming. Master pond preparation, water quality, feeding strategies, and more to keep your shrimp healthy. Dive deep into intensive shrimp farming. Grab your copy today and start your shrimp adventure. Visit our webpage in the description below now for more details. And now, back to the video.
It does. The report really zeroes in on the whole innovation in trade thing, and it highlights the growing importance of traceability and certification. Those are becoming absolutely crucial for consumers and businesses alike.
So, okay, so traceability. That helps us track where our seafood comes from. And then certification, that ensures it meets certain environmental and social standards.
Sure.
Okay, that makes sense. So it kind of gives us the power to make those informed choices about what we eat.
Exactly. And it's not just about the fancy stuff, you know. The report also highlights the role, this often overlooked role, of small fish in providing, food security and nutrition. And this is especially crucial in low-income countries.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, we often think about sustainable seafood as like this high-end fancy thing, right? But it's really about ensuring everyone everywhere has access to nutritious, affordable food no matter where they are.
Absolutely. The report even provides some pretty inspiring examples. Like in Ghana, they're turning tuna frames, the stuff that would normally just be discarded, they're turning it into dried fish powder. That helps boost nutrition. And in Guatemala, they're creating fish cakes from whole tilapia using the entire fish. Simple solutions can have a huge impact.
That's amazing. Really shows how innovation can happen. Well, it can happen at all levels, right? But even with all these positive efforts, I imagine there are still some big challenges facing, fisheries and aquaculture. What does the report say about that?
Well, it definitely doesn't shy away from the tough stuff. One of the major concerns, a big one, is the impact of climate change, particularly things like El Niño events on fisheries.
Yeah, I can see how those events could be, disruptive, but how exactly do they affect things?
Okay, well, think about it this way. El Niño, it causes these massive shifts in ocean temperatures and currents. And that can really disrupt fish distribution, mess with their abundance. And it can even, it can throw off entire fishing seasons. It's almost like musical chairs for marine life, but with some pretty potentially devastating consequences.
Oh, wow. That's a powerful analogy. And the report mentions a real-world example, right?
It does. The 2023-2024 El Niño, it led to a 50% reduction in Peruvian anchoveta landings. And that kind of disruption, it ripples through the global seafood supply chain. It can even affect what we see in the supermarket.
It really highlights how interconnected our global food systems are, huh? So we've got record production, a shift towards aquaculture, and both challenges and opportunities when it comes to sustainability. Yeah. Seems like a lot to unpack here. What stands out to you so far?
What strikes me is this. Despite the challenges, there's this real sense of urgency and a call to action throughout this report, this blue transformation, It's not just some concept. It's about taking concrete steps toward a more sustainable future. And that's where things get really interesting because everyone has a role to play, but more on that later. Now, I'd love to know, what's resonating with you? What's caught your attention so far? It's really interesting, how the report kind of digs deeper into, the complexities of data collection for global fisheries. It's not, as straightforward as you might think.
You're right. I hadn't really considered that. Getting accurate numbers, like on fish populations, on catches, it could be a real challenge. What are some of the hurdles?
So the FAO, they're the main source for all these statistics, right? Mm-hmm. Well, they face a big challenge in gathering all that data. Not all countries report their fishing data consistently. Some don't even report at all. And that makes it really hard to get a truly accurate global picture.
I see. So how do they deal with those gaps in information?
Well, they kind of have to rely on estimations. Like back in 2022, around 16% of the global production data had to be estimated. And when you look at other factors like employment in fisheries, the number of fishing vessels, those estimation percentages, they jump even higher.
Wow, that's a lot of guesswork. Must make it kind of tough to make informed decisions about fisheries management.
Exactly. And the report, it points out that data from inland fisheries, that's often lacking. Those smaller scale, widely dispersed fishing operations, those can be really tough to track.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's got to be like a logistical nightmare to gather data from all those different sources, right?
Yeah.
But why is this data gap? Why is it such a big deal?
Because without a clear understanding of, how much fish is being caught, it's almost impossible to manage those resources sustainably. Yeah. You could be overfishing without even realizing it,
Yeah, and that would have long-term consequences for the fish, the ecosystems, and the communities that rely on them.
Precisely. It also makes it much harder to track our progress towards those big global sustainability goals, like, the ones outlined in SDG 14, which focuses on life below water. Solid data. I mean, that's crucial for making good decisions and managing fisheries well.
So data is key. Got it. Mm-hmm. Now, the report, it delves into overfishing, but does it highlight any specific regions or species that are particularly at risk?
It does. The report provides some really insightful regional breakdowns. For instance, it takes a close look at the Mediterranean and Black Sea, where, well, total landings have been declining for decades. Reached a real low point back in 2014.
Oh, wow. So have there been any signs of recovery since then?
There was a bit of an uptick in production for a little while, but, in 2020 and 2021, landings fell again. And the report kind of attributes this, at least partly, to the COVID-19 pandemic and its ripple effects on fishing and trade.
Oh, right. Yeah, the pandemic really disrupted, well, everything. I mean, even impacted what's happening in the oceans.
It really did. And the report, it acknowledges those disruptions. But going back to the Mediterranean, a lot of commercially important fish stocks they're facing challenges there, including species like hake, whiting, even the common octopus.
Okay, so it sounds like, even though landings have declined overall, overfishing is still a big concern in that region.
It is, and it really highlights, this urgent need for stronger management measures to protect those vulnerable stocks. It's a wake-up call, really.
Definitely a wake-up call. Now, are there any regions where fisheries seem to be doing a little better?
Well, there are some bright spots, yeah. The Southeast Pacific, for instance, has seen a rebound in landings lately, mainly driven by, increases in catches of Peruvian anchoveta.
Okay, that's encouraging. And, I remember reading that anchoveta, it's a key ingredient in, fish meal and fish oil production, right?
Yeah.
And that's essential for aquaculture.
Absolutely. It plays a huge role. But, the report also points out that some other important species in that region, like the South American pilchard, hake, and Patagonian toothfish, those are all currently overfished.
Okay, so even in areas where overall production is rising, there are still some specific species that are struggling. Really emphasizes the need for a targeted and kind of nuanced approach to fisheries management.
Exactly. It's not just about reducing the number of fishing vessels out there. It's about managing those specific fish stocks and ensuring their long-term health. And speaking of strategies, the report highlights some innovative approaches that are being explored to improve the health of fisheries globally.
Like what? Like curious.
One interesting example is this use of electronic monitoring systems, or EMS for short. It's like having a digital eye on board those fishing vessels.
Okay, yeah, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, it involves, installing cameras, other monitoring equipment on those fishing boats, and that collects real-time data on their catches, their fishing locations, even whether they're complying with those regulations,
Wow, that's high tech. So it's kind of like having like a digital watchdog, ensuring that everything's being done by the book.
Yeah, you could say that. And the data that's collected through these systems, it's super valuable for management purposes. The report mentions that Saudi Arabia, they've actually successfully implemented EMS, and it's helped improve the quality and the timeliness of their fisheries data.
Yeah, that makes sense. The more accurate and timely the data, the better the decisions about managing those fisheries, right? But I mean, technology alone can't solve everything, can it?
Right. The report, it stresses that, while technology is helpful, strengthening fisheries governance is just as important. That means having clear regulations in place, transparent decision-making, and robust enforcement to combat illegal fishing.
So it's about creating a strong framework, not just relying on the gadgets, right?
Exactly. And within that framework, the report highlights the really crucial role of those regional fisheries management organizations, the RFMOs. They coordinate those efforts across international waters.
That makes sense. I mean, fish don't care about those national boundaries, do they?
Nope, they swim wherever they please. So effective management, it requires countries that share those same fish stocks to work together, to cooperate. It's a team effort. And this brings us to another interesting concept that the report explores, participatory governance.
Participatory governance, what's that all about?
It's the idea of, involving not just the governments and scientists, but also, the local fishing communities, the people who live it, in the decision-making process. After all, who knows those fishing grounds better than the people who work on them every day?
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. They have that firsthand knowledge, that experience. That's invaluable.
Absolutely. And this bottom-up approach, it can lead to more effective, more sustainable solutions because everyone's got a seat at the table. Their voices are heard. Their knowledge is valued.
It sounds like a more holistic and collaborative approach to fisheries management. So we've got technology, governance, community involvement, all playing a part in creating a more sustainable future for fisheries.
You got it. It's a complex challenge for sure, but the report also highlights this potential for positive change. Remember how we talked about rebuilding those overfished stocks? That could generate, billions of dollars in additional revenue every year. That's a powerful incentive to invest in sustainable practices.
For sure. It shows that environmental protection and economic prosperity, they can go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Now, before we move on to discuss aquaculture, I'm curious what aspects of the report's discussion on sustainable fisheries management really resonated with you.
What really struck me was this emphasis on data and just how crucial it is for effective management. It's like the foundation upon which everything else is built, And then building on that foundation, you have these really exciting innovations like those electronic monitoring systems. They're transforming how we monitor and manage fisheries. It's a really, really dynamic field. What about you? What are your key takeaways?
All right, so we've talked about, the challenges and those opportunities in those traditional fisheries. But now let's dive into the world of aquaculture. This report, it really paints it as like this rising star in global seafood production, doesn't it? I mean, it explores its growth, the potential impact on those sustainability goals, even some of the innovations that are happening in the field. What are your initial thoughts on that?
Well, aquaculture, it's often been portrayed as either like a savior or a villain when it comes to sustainable seafood, but this report, it takes a more nuanced approach, I think. It acknowledges, both its promises and its potential pitfalls.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a complex issue with no easy answers,
Yeah.
right? But first, can we just talk about the sheer scale of aquaculture's expansion? I mean, we mentioned earlier how farmed fish production actually surpassed those wild catches in 2022, right? I mean, it's mind-boggling.
It is, and that historic moment, it really just highlights how significant a role aquaculture is playing, in feeding this growing global population. But demand isn't the only driver behind this growth.
So what else is contributing to this aquaculture boom?
The report, it emphasizes the role of technological advancements, innovations. Those breakthroughs are really making it possible to produce more fish, but with fewer resources.
Can you give me some examples of these innovations?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're seeing improvements in everything from, breeding programs and fish feeds to, more efficient farming techniques. For instance, there's a growing interest in something called recirculating aquaculture systems, or RAS for short. These systems, they treat and reuse water, minimizing that environmental impact.
So it's about finding smarter, more sustainable ways to farm fish, not just producing more and more.
Right, exactly. And the report, it showcases some really cool examples of this kind of, ingenuity. One that comes to mind is integrated multitrophic aquaculture, or IMPA.
IMTA, yeah, I've heard that term before, but I'm not entirely sure what it means. Can you break it down for me?
Sure. Think of it this way. It's like creating a mini ocean farm, where different species are cultivated together. It mimics those natural ecosystems. So, for example, you might have, fish, seaweed, and shellfish all growing in the same system, each one benefiting from the others.
Oh, so the waste from one species becomes food for another? That's pretty cool. It sounds like a closed loop system.
That's the idea. It's all about creating a more balanced and a more sustainable approach. And the report also highlights, the potential of offshore aquaculture, farming fish further out at sea. That can help reduce the pressure on those delicate coastal ecosystems.
It all sounds very, very promising, but I'm sure there are also, some challenges associated with aquaculture. Right? What are some of the concerns that the report raises?
Well, one key concern is, the potential impact of aquaculture on those wild fish stocks. And this is especially relevant when it comes to farming, carnivorous species like salmon and tuna. They require fish meal and fish oil in their diets, which can put pressure on other fish populations.
So even though we're farming fish, we're still relying on wild fish for feed. It seems kind of counterintuitive.
It does present a challenge. And the report, it really emphasizes how important it is to find, those alternative sources, more sustainable sources for those essential nutrients. Thankfully, there are some promising solutions on the horizon.
I'm glad to hear that. What are some of those alternatives that are being explored?
Well, scientists they're looking into things like insect meal, algae-based feeds, and even genetically modified crops as potential, replacements for that fish meal and fish oil. The goal is to reduce, our reliance on those traditional sources.
That's fascinating. It sounds like the industry is really starting to think outside the box when it comes to fish feed.
They are. And the good news is, the aquaculture industry it's already making progress in reducing its reliance on that fish meal and fish oil. It's a step in the right direction for sure. But there are other, environmental concerns that the report addresses as well. Well, poorly managed aquaculture operations, they can contribute to pollution. The waste, those excess nutrients from these farms, they can negatively impact water quality, the surrounding ecosystems.
That makes sense. So it's not just about like what species you're farming. It's also about those responsible farming practices.
Exactly. Sustainable aquaculture, it requires, careful site selection, effective waste management systems, strict disease control protocols, all to minimize that environmental impact.
Right. Speaking of disease control, I've always been kind of concerned about the use of antibiotics in aquaculture. Does the report address that issue?
It does. The report, it acknowledges that overuse of antibiotics in aquaculture, it can contribute to the development of antimicrobial resistance. And that's a serious concern, not just for, fish health, but for global human health as well.
Yeah, it's a reminder that these issues are all interconnected, aren't they?
They are. And that's why the report really emphasizes, promoting that responsible antibiotic use. That includes, focusing on disease prevention, implementing strong biosecurity measures, and exploring, those alternative treatments.
You mentioned biosecurity a couple of times now. Can you explain what that means in the context of aquaculture?
Sure. Think of it as, a set of measures, comprehensive measures, taken to prevent the introduction and spread of, diseases and pests within those aquaculture facilities. It's kind of like having, really good hygiene practices, but on a much larger scale.
Okay, so it's about protecting the health of those farmed fish.
Yeah.
But also preventing the spread of diseases to those wild fish populations, right?
Exactly. Biosecurity, it's crucial for both the economic and the environmental sustainability of aquaculture. It's about, safeguarding the whole ecosystem, not just the farm itself.
Yeah, it seems like the FAO is really taking this holistic approach to aquaculture.
They are. And the report, it highlights how the FAO is working to promote those best practices and provide capacity building, on biosecurity in countries around the world. But beyond those environmental aspects, the report also, it delves into the social and the economic side of aquaculture.
What are some of the key takeaways in those areas?
Well, the report, it emphasizes the importance of aquaculture for, food security, for livelihoods, especially in those developing countries. It provides jobs, income for millions of people. And we talked earlier about the role of aquaculture in addressing malnutrition, providing access to those nutrient-rich small fish.
Yeah. It sounds like it has the potential to be a real force for good, doesn't it?
It does, but it's important to acknowledge that aquaculture can, sometimes lead to social and economic challenges as well. Issues like, land tenure, access to resources, and fair labor practices, those need careful consideration.
So it's about ensuring that the benefits of aquaculture, they're shared equitably, and that the industry operates in a socially responsible way.
Absolutely. Sustainable aquaculture needs to, balance those environmental, those economic, and those social factors. It's about finding solutions that work for everyone, not just for profits.
It brings us back to this idea of blue transformation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just a catchy phrase. It's a call to action for the entire industry and for all of us, really.
You've hit the nail on the head there. It's about transforming those aquatic food systems, making them truly sustainable, making them equitable for everyone, and that requires a collective effort from governments, industrial leaders, to scientists, those local communities, and even consumers, like us.
Yeah. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored, those record-breaking production numbers, the ongoing challenges of overfishing, the rise of aquaculture, and the importance of those sustainable practices across the board.
Yeah.
What are your final thoughts for our listeners?
I think the key takeaway is this: the future of our oceans and those food systems that they support Well, it depends on the choices that we make today, whether it's, advocating for stronger fisheries management or supporting those responsible aquaculture practices or even just making informed choices about, the seafood that we buy. Each action we take, it ripples outward. This report, it's a call to action. It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a more sustainable future for our blue planet. So what actions will you take?
Boost your shrimp farming success with our step-by-step 120-day protocol for intensive shrimp farming. Master pond preparation, water quality, feeding strategies, and more to keep your shrimp healthy. Dive deep into intensive shrimp farming. Grab your copy today and start your shrimp adventure. Visit our webpage in the description below now for more details. And now, back to the video.